Okay, so game aesthetics, week two. We're looking at the sensory aesthetics. This is a continuation of the MDA framework that we covered the week before. So sensory is basically everything that you can experience with your senses, right? So obviously we don't experience games through taste or smell, or maybe we just haven't tapped into that market yet. But normally we experience games through touch, through through visuals and audio. So you do get certain games that extend the touch experience, because in a way sensory is also, your mouse and keyboard or your touch screen or your controller, but you can extend that um, through other devices like the Kinect or VR, or Wii games, if those things still exist, or some sort of a controller that's specific to a game, like Guitar Hero, um, a guitar, or a steering wheel or something like that that you may acquire to help um, complete the illusion of um, the game experience. Um, right. Now, if you think about those sensory experiences when you play games, they're obviously led by other things like, or predetermined by other things like the nature of the game. So if you're playing a flight simulator, then you probably want to get as close as possible to that experience. So you're going to target certain platforms, and you're going to make sure that the sounds um, and the graphics support that illusion. So um, the fantasy aspect of it, the illusion that you want to create, directly impacts the sensory, and so does the narrative. So if you're trying to create a game that needs to convey a certain narrative or emotive quality, then you also need to make sure that that's conveyed in the visuals. So we'll see, based on the examples that we're going to look at, that um, certain games or games choose to either they can have aspects of all of this. So they can have fantasy, and they can have narrative and challenge, and all of those together could inform the sensory experience. But more often than not, what they do is they sort of prefer, or take a um, uh, or sort of prioritize, rather, certain aspects of the game. So if a game needs to be particularly narrative driven, then you'll probably find that the level of challenge or the level of fantasy suffers because of it, or is deliberately neglected because of it, because they don't want it to um, to contest the other. So something like um, Firewatch, for example, that's highly narrative driven, didn't have a lot of action in it. They could have easily made it like the next Tomb Raider, but the point was to tell a story in a particular way and drive a certain type of interaction, stimulate a certain sensory experience, and also target a particular demographic um, through the narrative, rather than just making another Tomb Raider. Okay, and then sometimes, if a game is particularly challenging, they might forego some of the graphic fidelity, or the um, the complexity or design of the game, because the the challenge is what's most important to it. So you'll see that all those type of Mario games, Mario Kart, and all those type of things that are action driven are normally quite simple in their design, and and not too overwhelming. It doesn't mean that's always the case. Sometimes a game can include all of these. So if you think of something like, what was it? Nope, it's gone. But like even, yeah, okay, not Tomb Raider doesn't really have much of a narrative. It's still challenging. It's still fantasy. I'm thinking of. Uh, no, it's gone. Sorry. Um, okay, so I wanted to take platformers as an example because I love playing platformers. It's my favorite genre. But also so that we can look at something that's simple enough to dissect and really look at the components as individual things. Okay. I'm probably most familiar with that, so I'm comfortable discussing it with you. And um, the other reason why it's interesting to me to take a lot of games from a similar genre is to see how much the take on the genre can vary, and how certain decisions made um, pertaining to the game also um, impacts the three C's. Sorry, my brain is going for a bowl of mush here. I think what I'm trying to say is that you're like, even though there's from the same um, genre, they deliberately make decisions that support the different aesthetics from the game. And we can clearly differentiate between those and see that, you know, the outcome and the way that the game is being received in the end of the day is completely different. Okay, so control, camera, and character. Um, to quickly describe the complex interdependent relationship between the inputs of the player and the reactions of the character on screen, and how the character is captured in the frame of the game's camera. So these are the things that drive the main interaction of the game. Okay, the player, which is in control of the avatar, which is the character, and then the way that we direct it as the designer. Those are the three things at play when I think of the three C's, and that's why they're basically a short description of what that entire game entails. Now, sure, certain games don't have characters, or you don't see your character from a third person perspective. Perhaps it's like a first person shooter or something like that, and then the character isn't really such a strong presence or so important to the game itself. Um, but those would most likely focus on the other aspects of it, like the control of it. So they sacrifice the character for more control and handing over more control to the user in the end of the day. Okay, all of these aspects are still important though. And I remember last time when we were looking at one of the examples, I said like, what I'm not particularly interested in character, or rather the character design. So I don't really care if it's a mongoose or a polar bear or a iguana or a flamingo, as long as um, you describe the way that the choice in character is going to influence the control. Okay, so only if that design of the character is actually going to matter to the aesthetics of the game do you need to mention it. Otherwise, my main concern is like, how do you allow the player to experience it, and how do you plan as a designer to frame it and present it to the player? Okay, the character is sort of the in between and what exists in the game. For me, that really it goes hand in hand with the narrative and the fantasy, And yes, it's important to me, but it's not as important at this stage. I'm rather trying to emphasize the relationship between the one that presents the game and the one that receives the game, or the experience. So the the director and the viewer, if you had to think of it as in film terms. Okay. Um, then we're also looking at how the theme and the style and the mood of these different examples vary. And then, yes, like I said, the game as a brand, or the company that produces the game as a brand. Okay, so the games that we're looking at, it's Abe's Odyssey, or rather Abe's Odyssey and its remakes. So the Saga, and that was made by Oddworld Inhabitants. We have Inside by Playdead, Super Meat Boy by Team Meat, Ori and the Blind Forest, Swords and Sorcery, Oxenfree, and Machinarium. Okay. Now, if you look at just the type of games that things like Oddworld Inhabitants release, most of their games kind of look the same. Like I mentioned before, Playdead made Inside and Limbo. Their games also look the same. Haven't really seen anything else from them, but I know that Amanita Design also did a bunch of other sort of point and clicks that are very similar in mechanics, but are way different in sort of theme. Okay, their design style is also quite similar, but their themes are entirely different. But these studios tend to make games that kind of fit together. Okay, so Abe's Odyssey. Why I like this example, and actually going through my slides again today, I realized that there are actually two games on here that are very similar, although they were made in very different ways, but they target the same type of player. So Abe's Odyssey and Ori and the Blind Forest, to me, feel like they were treated in very similar ways. While the rest of the things that I selected were deliberately chosen because they look so different from the others. So there's a little bit of an overlap. I mean, the theme is again completely different, but the type of approach, because in both games they made these elaborate, fantastic worlds. Both have characters that the designer wants you to empathize with. They're both sort of cute in their own way. They're both on this epic journey to save their civilization or race or forest or whatever it is that they need to save. But you actually get that narrative reinforced in Super Meat Boy, but on a more of a parody level. And yeah, it's just interesting to see that these similarities exist. Okay, so Abe's New and Tasty, that's the remake of Abe's Odyssey, I believe, and it was redone because the original, and I wanted to check that and look that up, I couldn't. Abe's Odyssey was made in 1997. I think I said 1996 last time, but okay, yeah. So it was done quite a while ago. Computers back then, they weren't quite the same. So the screen resolution that they targeted was something like 800 by 600, and that was the sort of main resolution that it could run on. Therefore, the need to remake it, and they chose to make it or redo it in Unity. So a lot of the remade stuff. Before I get to that, sorry, let me just skip over to the next. I'll get back to the intro. A lot of the remade stuff, you'll notice that there's a lot more perspective on it, and you can move around where the original was sort of pre-rendered and very 2D. There were some elaborate camera moves, but I think those were again pre-rendered, and there weren't actual 3D models inside the engine. Okay, so that was interesting enough about the remake. Okay, so things that I want you to notice when we watch this video is the way that this game chose to set up its control scheme, the type of interaction that it promotes or that wants the player to perform in order to complete the game, the sounds that they use to set a certain tone and mood, the type of textures and lighting, this sort of sickly feel compared, of the factories and the smog and the smoke, compared to the sort of corporate, idealized advertisements and things like that. So they're definitely adding some sort of social commentary. There's embedded information in the way that they present things. They're making social commentary as they go along, and it's not just surface level. So really try and look at all the intent that and all the thinking that the designer put into the decisions that it made. Oops, now I went. Excuse the Spanish. It was the best quality video I could find. But this is also something that you would typically need to consider and design. You know, what interaction model is best suited for the type of interaction that I require, and that's an aesthetic decision because it's tactile. Your player is going to have to handle it and be able to perform these actions, maybe often repeatedly, in the most sort of best and comfortable way that you can possibly present it. I mean, you can. Oh, sorry. There's a bit of mood there that you can. You can obviously allow players to have some amount of flexibility around the design of the or the layout of the controls, but you need to make like good recommendations and design decisions in that area in any case before, even if you don't, well, especially if you don't allow it to change. Okay, so just a little bit more from the cinematics, I think, keeping in mind that it was remade recently, but also if you actually go back and watch the original cinematics, they're very similar in their mood and general aesthetic. So if we look at the aesthetic of this character first of all, right, so we'll get back to what it originally looked like. The character design didn't really change, but immediately the character was created so that you can feel sorry for it, right? So you're looking at the character and thinking like, this poor thing, its mouth sewn shut, it's got these huge sort of baby eyes on the side of its or rather baby face proportions with huge eyes on the side of its head. It's a little egg-shaped face as well, so it's really it's an odd-looking creature, and you immediately feel sorry for it. Now, through the narrative, they establish that this is now, or they're now, the new meat. So we need to, he needs to save his peers from, becoming just another product, and slaughtered and wiped out essentially. So you can, in this game, you can either choose to save everyone, or you can actually finish the game without saving any of these creatures. I think they're called Medukans. But they do remind you every now and then of how many you've actually killed and how many you've saved. So they're really playing on the sort of emotional factor, the fact that you can that they're trying to internalize, and I think this plays a little bit more towards the feelings of the game rather than the aesthetics of the game, but trying to internalize your responsibility for the other creatures in the game. Um, you can't shoot, you're quite clumsy, but you can possess other creatures. You can mind control them, and then you can take over, and then you can use that to kill other other creatures, but rather in a way that it just sort of clears your way so that you can run through it. The main purpose of this game, or rather gameplay, is that you try and outrun the enemies. So you're supposed to run away from everything and sneak in the shadows and use these bird portals to make the other creatures escape as best as you can. Now, what's interesting about the way that the aesthetics support that, or the visuals, or the actually everything that you see and experience supports that, is um, you're often cast in shadow, so you're often in silhouette. Um, it's forcing you to make or to learn by failing as well. The way that the original game, and you'll see some of it in the new ones as well, sort of allowed you to progress to the next stage without necessarily seeing what's waiting for you. So they kind of want you to respond um, as quick as possible in order to survive, and then, well, then eventually it just becomes impossible and you fail, and then you have to do that thing again. So there's a lot of these bird portals that are basically auto saving. It wants you to repeat this action over and over and practice it until you're good at it, and then actually make it through the level. So that's the challenge aspect of it. The narrative aspect of it points towards your main goal. So you're supposed to save all these creatures, and take responsibility for them. And another thing that's also interesting about the way that the character moves and the controller moves is that you're very clumsy. You're you're and I think that was conveyed in the early stages in the menu already. When you're just talking, you can hear that this guy's kind of goofy. He doesn't sound too smart. He farts and laughs at it and things like that, right? So he's quite a goofball. He moves that way, right? So he walks funny. He's slouched. He's got awkward proportions. He's got like giant hands and feet. When he runs into stuff, when he bumps into stuff, he goes like, ugh, and then he falls over and then lies there. So he's meant to be this klutz, and when you control him, um, you actually feel that. So the controls are very sticky. They're slow. He turns around and it takes a long time. You have to sort of preempt the jumps so that you time it just right so that they actually jump and grab onto stuff. Um, but it's not immediate. Nothing happens really quickly. You have to plan everything and really get your timing perfect for you to progress. The same thing goes for the camera here. It's almost as if the camera is personified by this um, clumsiness. It's late. The camera is always lagging behind. It allows you to make these sort of leaps of faith before you even know what's there. So they deliberately delay the camera so that it adds to the gameplay. Do you guys see that? Who's played Abe?
Yes, it's great.
Yeah, I have like when I was very young on PlayStation 2, I think.
That's really good. Um, yeah, and then Abe and Abe's Odyssey as a brand. I think the only thing that I wanted to say is that like there's this whole franchise with different creatures, but they all seem to exist to the same world. So Oddworld inhabitants, and then I think there's Stranger was another PlayStation game that they made. Um, and there's a couple of Odd Worlds or Abe's series, and then there's something some other adventure game, but they all have the same sort of creatures, um, and they retained all their rights to this franchise. So I mean, one day if they want to, or if they somehow feel that they've got enough of a following, they could potentially release, you know, more products in the same line. I
Well,
feel
the
like
Soulstorm that's being released this year, made in Unity,
yeah. Oh,
new
there's
Abe game. They
another.
demoed it at the Unity, one of the Unites or
Oh,
something.
cool.
It looks amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'd love to play that.
Yeah,
Yeah, they should make a movie as well, I think.
that would be so cool. Yes, an Oddworld movie would be so amazing.
Yeah. Um, all right. So, what I feel we need to look at when we look at Inside is how it contrasts with something like Abe's Odyssey. The sort of the cleansiness of the design, even though they have the same narrative. Basically, they have um, this sort of overpowering organization, or this money hungry type of, you know, big brother kind of entity that wants to control everyone and wants to take control of everything and just overpower. That theme is there in both, or that part of the narrative is there in both, but it's done completely differently. The design is completely different. The style is different. Um, the the way they tell the story is even different. Whereas in Abe's Odyssey, they give you this sort of introduction to what's happening. In Inside, you don't know what's happening. You're meant to play the game so that you can explore. All right, and that's one of the really cool things about games, is that while they allow you sometimes to just stand around and do nothing, they actually expect you to interact at some point, right? And it's fine to do that. It's to be expected, because you didn't purchase a game just to stand there and have the chickens pick your feet, right? You buy a game because you want to explore, because you're curious and you want to know what it's about. So they sort of drop you in this world that seems somewhat threatening. They use the same sort of silhouette stuff for the hiding aspect of it. The the controller is very similar though. So in both cases, the controller is quite clumsy. It doesn't turn immediately. You have to sort of plan your actions. You can replay certain scenes because you need to run away. You can't really battle anything. Yeah, there's no shooting or anything like that. I don't think I really picked any shooters in this. I think I'll include Cuphead in it down the line, so we can actually look at more shooter platformers as well. But
Overwatch.
Overwatch. It's not,
Not a platformer.
it's not a platformer. No. Okay. Okay. Anyway, um, so yeah, you run for most of the time. Sometimes there's a little bit of a puzzle that you need to figure out and push things down the line or down edges, and grab onto stuff and pull levers and things. Uh, Time your escape as well, but for most part you're running. The difference between this camera and the Abe's Odyssey camera, even though the remake of Abe's Odyssey has a little bit of a perspective to it and it does shift, it's like I feel like this camera is a lot more cinematic. Like their framing is very deliberate. The like where they put it and the movement of it is a lot more in tune with the character. So when the character falls, then the camera shakes. When it climbs over something, then the camera shifts from the one side to the other side. Um, when there's world events like explosions and stuff, the camera shakes. So it's like you're you're playing with this character, right, as an avatar, but you're part of the world. You can feel the world's effect on you as a viewer. Um, and I think that's quite powerful. If you can get a camera to speak to you like that and to make you engage like that, it's really good. Um, and another thing that's worth noting about the camera here is that it allows you to see ahead of you, because for some reason in Abe, because he's so clumsy, you kind of want him to. You don't mind failing as much, right? So he dies and he turns into like a ball of light and birds scatter, and that's okay. Or I can't even remember. I think maybe he just lies in a pile. But the point is, you don't really feel so much for the character. Maybe because he was going to be meat anyway. But in this case, this little boy, for some reason, like every time they get you or every time you die, you feel terrible. And it was the same with Limbo. You know, you get like this huge fright when that spider like sticks its like claws through you, but you don't. You feel it. Like in other I don't know, maybe that was just me, but I feel like the way that the camera moves, the mood that's created, the empathy that they manage to instill with this character, even though it doesn't even have a face, somehow makes you feel responsible for this character. And I think it's not one particular thing that does that. It's a combination of the entire design, the entire sensory and aesthetic experience is what leads you there. Okay, so here's something completely different. Um, Here um, they almost want to desensitize you. They actually make fun of the fact that there's some sort of underlying narrative. Um, they their their main character is already covered in blood. It leaves blood stains everywhere where it goes. Okay, so Super Meat Boy is taking something about the platformer genre and the sort of the inspiring narrative, and they're turning it on its head, and they're doing it on purpose. So you still have sort of beautiful design elements, but you can see that not there wasn't the same amount of care um, given um, to the design of the level. It's mainly functional. Okay, so where they place these things has an impact on the gameplay, and I'm not saying the others don't. I'm just saying that the emphasis here is on gameplay and speed, and the controller is way more responsive, and they actually want you to try and push the challenge aspect of it. Okay, so in terms of narrative, also listen to the sounds that they use, and immediately they're also um, establishing this sense of nostalgia. So they use like the old camera reel, film reels. There's some arcade type sounds in there. Um, they're basically trying to say, by just introducing the game, that they have some sort of a respect for what used to be, but they're also, by doing the thing that they're doing now, sort of poking fun at it, or changing it, or turning it on its head. So there's a sense of urgency. They push you, they drive you, they want to. They really emphasize the challenge aspect of this game. They don't mind you trying over and over again. They pressure you by like visibly making the or yeah, referring to the time like right there and then in the HUD. The sense of urgency is also driven by the fact that your girlfriend, according to the narrative, is waiting for you, and they place her strategically in some of the levels so that you you try and get there quicker or do stuff to get to her, and then every time you try and get to her, then she gets snagged away again or something like that. Another thing about this camera is that you can see that it's pretty much locked onto the character. They can't really afford to delay or to um, to shift the attention to anything else. So they don't spend a lot of time, looking at the environments. There's a little bit of a like sometimes they'll have this sort of composition where they show you the entire environment at once when the challenge, um, or it makes sense to the challenge of the game. So like it's a type of a puzzle effect, but and also there's a little bit of a vertical delay. So you'll see that the character can jump, and then the camera doesn't really do anything, but as it's locked onto the horizontal axis. So it gives you a little bit of stability when you look at the level, because you need to probably concentrate on what's happening around you. And I think it would have been jarring had the camera, lifted every time that the character moves. So it's really important to me that you just recognize the complexity of the decisions made by something or considering something as simple as a camera, because it really impacts the game in a massive way. And it's not just a matter of, okay, cool, we need a camera, we need to see what the character's doing, let's parent it to the character controller. That's probably like the thing that we do most of the time, and then we never address it again. And it's the worst possible thing that you can do, is to leave out like basically a third of your game, like not considering the way that you're directing the viewer, or completely neglecting directing the viewer is a huge oversight. Okay, so in Ori and the Blind Forest, like I said earlier, it's very similar in sort of, let's say, aesthetic fidelity, like the amount of detail that went into the design, even the technical approach they took to generate the artwork. So they in this game they well, in Abe it's a little bit different, because they pre-rendered 3D objects and then placed it in a 2D engine, and then later on replaced the 3D objects and put them back into a 3D engine, or bumped them up or redid them. I'm not sure how much of their old content they could still salvage, but surely they had to, because otherwise they wouldn't have just remade the game. In this case, they made 3D characters that they then pre-rendered and then put the 2D sprites and 2D elements into the engine, and then re-rigged the 2D elements so that they can get further detail in the animation. So that's already quite laborious, but they were really fixed on creating something beautiful. Okay, so they wanted to create this magical world, and they wanted to work with light, because that's sort of a theme in Ori and the Blind Forest. But they really needed you to care. Like, they took great care to make this character cute and move well, and kind of like move like something that you would already care for. So it's got like, it kind of moves like, it's cat-like, but it's in some cases it also feels like a fox. So they're trying to play on the sort of cute aspect, or the adorable aspect of the character design, but that wasn't enough. So they actually had to tell you a whole story as well, so that you feel, once again, you feel as if there's a purpose, a deeper meaning for this character. Yeah, when I saw those ghostly figures of the dude in the game, I remember thinking like, oh, There's trouble. This guy's gonna die. Um, so, so the thing with that is, um, the reason why they included the character in the first place is because they needed that narrative construct so that they could give you purpose for your mission, to get you invested in the purpose of the game, to buy into it. Um, and I think that speaks a little bit more to the emotive quality of it, but it's also, I think Jonathan asked last week, not last week, yesterday. How do you get someone to feel really angry about something, and the best way is to like look at sort of your personal experiences or other people's personal experiences or even films that you've watched that made you feel that way. Um, but it's often when there's sort of a lack of fairness, when there's some sort of an injustice, when something is given to you and then taken away again. So in this case, they couldn't get you to buy into it without um, making you feel like this was given to you at first. This was a caretaker, started caring for you. You played a part of that game. In the beginning, when you walked, then this character would follow you around, and then later on, when he's removed, they've basically now um, instilled that sense of absence, and that they wouldn't have been able to do that had they not given you that thing in the first place. So all of the design around the narrative as well is put there on purpose. And also, if you look at the way that the environment changes, the colors and the mood and everything enhances that experience. The audio, that sort of whistling, whining, sort of wind blowing sound almost sounds like howling. So you're already emotionally involved, even if you don't want to be. Music plays a massive role in the mood of something, and that's why soundscapes and sound snippets and those type of things are really important to me when it comes to the aesthetics of the game, and something that you definitely need to consider. We don't actually pay a great deal of attention to audio design in our game course, but it makes a massive impact on the way that something's perceived. You can actually try it if you've ever sort of, I don't know, watch something like that made you upset, and you just stick another soundtrack on that, like a happy-go-lucky or a more upbeat soundtrack, then it won't have the same effect on you at all. Like, I'm thinking of that sequence in Up where like, I don't know how emotionally connected you guys get to narratives, but like for that scene for me always hits me in the feels, right? So if you watch that same scene and you put something like "Don't Worry, Be Happy" kind of soundtrack onto that, it's going to have a completely different effect. So yeah, don't underestimate the impact of audio and sound design. Another thing that's interesting about this camera is that your character is very fast. Okay, or it's not actually that fast, but it's meant to feel like it's quite, that it can dash and it can run really quickly. So when they make it run, then the camera sort of shakes, and and you run a little bit out of the center of the frame, so it looks like you're almost running away from the viewer. But what's also interesting to me is that they place a lot of emphasis on the design of the game, and the design of the environments. So what they would often do is try and frame it in the best possible way so that you can get the sort of epicness of the environment. So like with this tree and this sort of ball of energy in the Ginzo tree, once again, they frame the um, the environment above the character. So when the character runs and moves around, then that's the focal point, and that's what it focuses on. But when there's something that needs to be emphasized for its, whether it's significant or whether it's just beautiful, they'll frame it in the center of the frame, and then you have symmetry and leading lines and everything that supports that. So they often create these um, compositions that just really support the beauty of the game. Here's another beautiful game, but for all different reasons. Swords and Sorcery. It's a, a pixel art game, and it's really beautiful. And I played this on mobile. I didn't actually. I saw someone do I found a gameplay video that looked um, like it was played on desktop. I don't know if it was some sort of a screen capture. I wasn't aware that there was a desktop version. I actually thought this was a mobile game only. But it's really beautiful, and they do the same thing. They prioritize the landscapes because they must have spent so much time on this and creating this environment and making it as epic as it is, that they just really need to show it off. And even when the camera moves over these environments, like there is a little bit of a rocking back and forth on camera, and sometimes it would track from one side to the other, but it's not nearly as quick as something like Super Meat Boy. There's no reason to follow the character around all the time. In fact, they'll allow the character to enter and exit frame without actually changing composition much. So the emphasis here is on something completely different. It's way more of an experience. The writing behind it is also very good and quite funny, and they also sort of poke fun at the genre, while the music and everything is epic. But there's a sort of a gameplay review by GameSpot that I thought was quite well done, and they also mention how important the sound design for this game was. Oxenfree was another good example of how something that's typically sort of difficult to do in games, conveying certain information, or conveying a narrative, or rather unfolding a narrative, can be done differently. Their design around the UI and the interaction of the UI makes it feel like it's part of the world. It gels really well. It also tries to emphasize the environments rather than the action, because it's essentially a point and click. So you can move from the one, I suppose, more a point and click than a platformer really. But you can move around from one side to the other of the environment, and that's why the framing of the camera stays the same, but the camera is still alive. It's not left static, so it's constantly moving, it's constantly floating. And here's just a bit of the feel for the game. I didn't really experience the game the way that the teaser is trying to promote it, or the trailer trying to promote it. I didn't find it quite as, let's say, thrilling or dramatic, but it's still a really well designed game. Originally, what's really appealing about it is that you already get a sense of what the dialogue is saying, even though you haven't read it. So and all the dialogue is very quick to interact with. So I think, and it's very satisfying as well to see these sort of options and then just pick it because it was essentially designed for touchscreen. Um, to just tap on it and move forward. Um, and scrubbing through that is also a very natural way. So I think just keeping in mind, like, whatever platform you choose, what sort of interaction is most suited for that particular platform, um, and and how can you make it work with the content that you have to um, add to the game, or the content that you have in mind for the game. Work with whatever you have, and design around that. Okay. Um, Missionarium is also, I suppose, a little bit more of a point and click. There's also a little bit of camera movement, but mainly focusing on larger layouts. The character here, like I said last time, I actually made a mistake and said it wouldn't have mattered if this was any other character, but that's not entirely true, because the way that the character responds here, or the way that he can stretch his arms or flatten himself, that's absolutely essential to the gameplay, and that wouldn't have worked with anything else. So it's just important, like when you set up a document explaining the aesthetics of your game and how you want the character to move and interact with things around it, that you consider that aspect of it. That if there's a design element that's going to influence the way that you react or that you play with that character, then you really have to make a point of mentioning it. Then the character aspect of camera character control becomes very important. So yeah, you can again sort of get a sense of what the world is by purely just looking at it. It's this sort of wonderful, miraculous, sort of steampunk looking mechanical world, and with these bizarre characters. It's definitely unique, but everything fits together, and if it doesn't fit, then it's almost like, oh, I can see that thing doesn't quite gel with the background. There must be something to it. I need to now interact with it. So even at times when things don't fit, they're done so deliberately. Okay, so the only thing that I wanted you to consider there is how both Oxenfree and Missionarium has these very sort of distinct soundtracks that um, instill a specific type of feeling or mood. Um, I mean, it's supported by everything, but like without that audio, it really wouldn't have been the same. Like if there was some sort of a happy, upbeat tune to Machinarium, it wouldn't have been nearly as intriguing and as sort of creepy as it is. Um, so yeah, and then just recognizing complexity in everything. Not just this is an example of cameras and how decisions surrounding cameras impact gameplay, but um, I want you to evaluate and consider every aspect of a game's design, like why the theme is what it is, why they need to set up the narrative the way that they have, why the camera moves the way that it is, why the sound that they've chosen is that specifically, and then when you make decisions for your game, those are the things that you put in place. You say, like, this is what I want to convey. This is the kind of feeling that I want the player to experience, and I want them to think or feel like this, and that is why I make these decisions. And that's essentially what your treatment is supposed to convey. We need to get a sense of what is the player going to experience when they play your game. Okay, so you guys can go and check out this link on Gamasutra. It has a lot more sort of camera examples, and they do this very nice thing, like sort of put crosshairs and things over stuff so that you can see exactly when and how the camera was made to respond. Cool. And I mean, it is once again also looking at platformers mainly, but a lot of this can be reappropriated and used in other settings and other games, other genres.